Welcome to the call with Nancy Sabato, where we have Christ-centered conversations that inspire and transform. What happens when identity feels like a battle, and how do we find our way from darkness into light? Well, here to talk about this topic of gender identity is my guest, Denise Shick, and she's talking about why she wrote the book, Out of the Darkness and Into the Light. Denise, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, I know that you have a story, so let's jump into that story so that the audience can understand why we're talking about this topic today.
Sure. Uh, when I was 9 years old, my father had taken me outside. I was in the kitchen actually doing dishes, and he said, Denise, can you come out? I want to talk with you. My dad was a serious man. He really wasn't that nice of a loving man either. So when dad said something, you just did it. You didn't question, you didn't wonder, it didn't take very long to do whatever he said. In that time frame of going out from the kitchen door to sitting down on the hill with him behind the garage, he just looked at me. His first words were, I want to become a woman. And this is how you will know when I am feeling this way. And he started to share several sort of details about his life. And I just sat there quietly. I mean, I'm 9 years old. I'm trying to process everything that he is sharing with me. And at the same time, saying, this won't affect you, Denise. Your dad and you are two separate people. But obviously, that was not the mature way of processing this type of news, because as soon as he was finished with all the details that he had shared with me, I felt like I'd lost my dad. He didn't want to be my dad. He even shared with me that he didn't want children, so I felt unwanted as a daughter. Um, Started to grieve the losses of the dreams that I had, because in my vision of what a dad would show a girl what type of boyfriend to date, what type of husband he would give her away at the wedding. Like all those little girl dreams that you have were just shattered at this time. Now, I didn't tell anybody, Nancy, when my father had told me this, and I didn't tell my mother because she was so often sick with migraine headaches that I thought if I tell my mom, I'm going to make her sick. And I can't do that to her because mom's already dealing with this and she has no idea what dad had just shared with me. So I kept the secret. And though that he struggled with his identity from a lot of brokenness that occurred in his life, he continued to stay at home for some years yet. So as far as my journey goes, by the age of 10 and 11, I started to think, did God make a mistake? Was dad supposed to be a woman? And if God made a mistake and dad was supposed to be a woman, then how do you know, Denise, that you're supposed to be a girl? So having a couple years of really trying to discover, who am I? What is the truth, right? And thank God that for some reason I started to gravitate towards questioning and saying, Denise, if you believe God made one mistake, how many more do you believe that he made? And that would make him not God of all possibilities, right? This is a God of error if I began to go down that road. So it was coming to understanding that, yes, you are a girl. These are circumstances. This was not God's plan for your dad to struggle to have the offenses done against him. And yet trying to still navigate that home. My heart for my dad was real. My love for him was real. But I'm trying to survive because my body started to mature. By 11 and 12 years old, I had men looking at me and noticing me. And my dad was becoming very jealous. He was very, very jealous of what my body was doing and developing. And the stairs, you would have to have been there to have gotten an idea of the glimpses of the uncomfortableness that I had being around my dad and the attitude that he would use. Well, by the time I was 13 and 14 years old, I discovered now that he had certain clothing of mine. I would put away the laundry. I would be in the truck in his truck and discover some of my things in the back seat or up in the attic. So I'm still trying to survive emotionally with feeling like everything was trying to suck me up into this darkness that he was living in. So I began to drink alcohol, save my babysitting and lunch money for alcohol, and drown myself in that whenever I could outside of the home. I hated going home because I knew the darkness that was there. I understood some of the abuse. My dad was very cruel towards me as I again started to mature and become that teenage girl, and there was some sexual abuse. So it became a point where I had to fight back for myself. And that was reaching a certain amount of courage, I guess, because it's like if you slap me, if you do this one more time, I'm going to punch you back. It's just reaching the point like I'm done. I can't do any more than I'm doing. And yet again, I loved him through all this. I knew he was hurting, but it was killing me inside mentally and emotionally. And I would cry out to God countless days. I'd look out at the sky and I'd say, Lord, I don't know why this is happening to my family, but I know you're there with me. And so through all those years, it was just knowing that God was with me and he was my strength and he would be there. It wasn't his design for any of this harm, again, to come towards my dad or towards myself. The manipulation and everything with my mother, that's not God's plan for a family, for a marriage. So just trying to survive, my plan was I would go into the military. I was thinking that I had to take care of myself when I graduated from high school. Just suck it up, Denise. You have a couple more years to go. But I unexpectedly met a Christian man. Though that I was raised Catholic and Catholicism was my foundation, and I'm thank God for that because that's where I really believe that I had a faith in God. I knew he was real, even in questioning him earlier in my childhood. But I didn't have a personal relationship with him. And that brought a whole nother layer of hunger of needing truth, but wanting something bigger than everything else that was going on. So this particular boyfriend, Mark, was a Christian. And through our relationship, he began to, he was so calm and loving, something totally opposite of my dad that was drawing me in. And as I discovered, he had a relationship with Jesus and he bought me my first Bible. And I just devoured that. I mean, I would go home from high school and just soak it in. Lord, tell me what you say about what my dad's doing. Tell me about what it is that I need to know about you. And Nancy, the first scripture in seeking God in that way that he brought me to was Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord your God with all your heart. And those words I clung to, I needed and would need for the years yet to come because again, my dad's still at home. Though that he is going out to the local bars with a red-headed wig and there's these behaviors going on. It's kind of like the family secret you have, it really isn't a family secret. When I was 18, a couple of months after high school graduation, I married Mark. Uh, and that was really big for me because I felt like you couldn't trust men. I couldn't trust anybody to take care of me because that wasn't being done at home. And yet, on my wedding day was also probably one of the most devastating days that I could recall because as I walked up to meet my dad in the church for my arm to go into his prior to walking up the aisle, he looked at me and he said, Denise, I wish it were me in that gown. And my heart just sunk and I thought, I can't believe you just said that.
Mm,
But I said, Denise, do what you've done so well. Put that smile on your face. Nobody else has to know. Nobody else has to know. You're really good about putting that smile on your face.
mm,
And so walking up the aisle with him was very difficult. He just had taken the day that was supposed to mean every little girl's dream come true. And I had to really focus on Mark, on our marriage vows, on all of that, instead of allowing that part to take over the beautiful
Mhm.
moment that it was. So it was 10 years after we were married where my father left my mother to pursue the identity as Becky.
Mm.
And that impacted me in a whole different way because, you're thinking, okay, is dad getting better? Maybe he's not. Maybe he's getting help. Mom and dad are still together. Like all these different scenarios that you play in your mind. Um, and so when we got the news that he was leaving her to go and transition, I experienced that grief all over again. At first, my dreams were taken, and I'm trying to process as a little girl, what does this mean? Dad wants to be a girl. How does this affect the family? But now he's leaving, right? Even though it almost seemed hopeless at that point because he's actually departing from the family. And that was the beginning of understanding what a deep, deep, dark depression felt like because I
Mhm.
didn't want to get out of bed. I couldn't move. At one point, I was actually looking down at my legs in bed and saying, you can put that foot down on the floor. And it seemed to take endless hours
Mm.
to get one leg down and then talk your other leg down. Then you're talking yourself to open up the door. So to understand what families, the difficulties that they have mentally, emotionally, when this news hits, it is devastating to them. So it was, actually a lot more things had happened in between there when dad had left, and you're hoping that he's going to come home. Every time I received a letter, there would be that false hope. He wants to come home, he wants to get help. And I just wasn't doing real well myself. And I'm trying to support my mother, my siblings. I'm the oldest of five. I was just crumbling. I had four small children as well. So it was a real balancing act that got out of balance real quick. And finally, the last letter that my dad sent to me, it was a card. I looked at the postmaster and I said, can you refuse this? I no longer could go on with those false hopes. It was destroying me. And so that was a boundary that I set up for myself because I had to get my life together here. One way or another, I had to get some strength, more than what I had been living in that point.
Mhm.
It would be 13 years later after he had left to and lived as Becky when my mother received the news that he had cancer and that he was going into hospice. There wouldn't be any hope uh, with treatments for him. And through those years, my unforgiveness, somebody does something and you think you've forgiven them, but then that hurt and that pain comes back that still hasn't been healed. And I think, no, I'm not forgiving you. I want that back. Like I owned some kind of power over him by thinking that I'm holding on to this grudge. And it was destroying, it was poisoning me. Because at that point, 13 years later, I realized my heart was hard. When I have told pastors, you couldn't have cracked it with an axe, I am very sincere. My heart was stone cold towards
Mm.
my dad. And so I realized I'd never really let go and forgiven him, as God tells us to do. But it's a very hard task to complete when you feel so hurt and betrayed in different ways.
Mm.
And the Lord said, you need to go and forgive your dad. And my dad was 4 hours away. And I said, no, I'm pretty good right where I'm at. Really felt that way, but God did not give up. He continued to come at me and say, you need to do this before he passes. You need to forgive him. I'm hearing the Lord's voice and what he wants me to do to obey him. But it took a couple weeks until he had actually worn me down. I said, okay, I will go, and working on my own feelings up until that point. And Nancy, the difficult thing of going to see somebody that's transitioned, especially when the years have gone by, you don't know what they look like. You don't know what's going to happen. And I asked my mother, who was still had some contact with him, obviously, not to let him know. And it wasn't to trick him. I was trying to get the courage to do this, to go and visit him and to see him. And I went to knock on the door, on his door. My brother had come with me. My husband was working out of town. And my dad didn't come to the door. And honestly, I thought, oh, great. Lord, I did what you asked. He didn't come to the door. He's not home. That's not my fault. I was obedient to you. But my brother said, Denise, knock one more time. And when I knocked that time and I seen my dad come towards the front door, I could see a figure. And all I said to myself at that time is, look at his eyes, Denise. Nobody can change their eyes. You look into his eyes and forget everything else that you see. And that helped me to hold it together because I wasn't looking at the hairstyle, the jewelry, the dress, what his home looked like. I could focus on him. And that was a very difficult time, a very difficult visit. I was very concerned unexpectedly for his own salvation. Where was he? There was a lot that was shared. It would take us a long time to go into that particular visit. But the important thing is when I had finished that visit, completed it, and I got in my brother's car and I thought, did what you asked, Lord, I'm done. I had no idea what God was doing because he started to just swell my heart for my dad. No longer being that 9-year-old girl, but now a 28-year-old adult. It's time that you understand at this age, Denise. It's time. And so I did a lot of research with aunts, great aunts, trying to figure out the family dynamics. But more importantly, the Lord called into my heart where I was calling my dad all the time. How are you feeling? I mean, I'm just being amazed in this process because that is not the heart I had prior. To go and to visit him when he went into hospice in the hospital. My mother, my brothers, everybody except for my one brother that's a recovered alcoholic. And he just knew that it wasn't a place that he could go. He just was not able to do that emotionally and mentally. But the rest of us surrounded him. And in those visits at the hospitals, when his LGBT friends were there, and trying to keep my focus again on my dad, not on everything else that was going on in the room or what somebody else was saying. When the medical staff, or at one point, one of his friends had said, Becky, she, I would say, you mean him? You mean my dad? You mean Harold? And it wasn't done with a critical heart. It was honestly done out of my care for him to be reminded he's on his deathbed, basically. And I wanted him to remember who he really was, the power that he has, if he's a child of the Lord. I was more concerned about his eternity, not him being comfortable and feeling good in the moment of where he was. Unfortunately, the last visit that Mark and I had with my dad, we walked in and he was in a coma. And that was very difficult because as family members, we're looking for the perfect Bible verse, something the light bulb's going to go on. And I was being so careful not to bat him over the head with the Bible because as far as he was concerned, his LGBT church was it. It was a Bible church. But in that time frame of walking in, and I thought, Lord, I don't know if it matters. I don't know if he can hear me, but by golly, I'm going to take a chance. So as Mark sat by the window and I sat by his bedside, I read those scriptures. And I prayed, Lord, let his ears hear. Let his heart receive what I am saying. And Nancy, I began to hold his hand. Now, that was huge for me, to actually hold the hand of a man that abused, as far as I'm concerned, it was emotional, it was mental abuse as a child, and then you got the sexual abuse on top of it. And my heart was melding for him. And I noticed that his body was growing cold. And so I'm rubbing his arm, trying to keep him warm, putting the blankets up around him as much as I can, waiting for my brother and my sister and their spouses to come before Mark and I left because we didn't want to leave him alone. When they arrived, Mark went out of the room. and gave me a few minutes with my dad. And this is the most priceless gift that I have, is this memory. Because as I bent over to kiss him on the forehead and lifted my head upward, I thought, Lord, your grace is amazing. I had completely forgiven my dad. I had been with him to shower him with love, to offer him truth, to listen to his plea, his cries, and to see the tears come down his cheeks, and to know that this man had said, this life, me and being as a woman, did not fulfill me as I thought that it would. Only Jesus Christ can fulfill us and that hunger that we have for something bigger than us. And that, in short, is a lifetime journey of where I've been, understanding the anger, the denial, and then you move towards anger and everything with the grief and picking up the pieces and trying to be there to support others in the family. And my mother, who sincerely loved this man, to be, in a sense, all that you could be, but leaving the pieces that God had to take care of with them, and trust God with those that I hold so dear in my family.
What a story. What a journey.
Yeah, it has been indeed.
Wow. But it didn't stop there, because now you're in the motion of trying to get people to understand about their identity and about their transgender journey. And, can you share, a story, from somebody that you've been kind of working with?
Yeah, I love to share this. There's so many different stories. Um, but let me choose Evie. Um, Evie was 7 years old when she was raped. Her mother told her, don't you tell anybody. You cannot tell your dad because he will go to prison. He will kill the person that was his family member that had done this to her, the violent act against her. And so she kept it in for years. It wasn't until she was 56 when she had called us after several counseling sessions where she broke down and never told anybody else, never even talked another time with her mother about the rape that she had endured and how that impacted her. Evie was 17 and became involved in a same-sex relationship with another woman who had children. Eventually, the woman said, if you become a man, I will never leave you.
Mm,
What did the woman do? She left Evie for a biological man after Evie had done all that she could to have her physical appearance as a man, and indeed she did. So Evie had met the expectations of what somebody else said, trying to find her value and her identity and how somebody else needed her or wanted her, all along ignoring her hurt heart
mm,
and all the scars that were underneath. There was so much that she had to deal with throughout life. And yet, this is where the Lord's amazing. As family members, many times we think we're the answer, when really it's Jesus Christ. It's God that's got to reach their heart. We can try to manipulate and try to do whatever we think we need to do to make this happen or to make it happen faster than God's plan, but we end up making a mess of it. And I say that because it's so unique how often, countless times I've heard where it's the Lord that speaks to the loved one, that draws them out of that dark place where they are. And that's
mm,
exactly what happened with Evie. God came in, she was a late night person.
mm,
And she said the Lord come to her in the middle of a show, like she's hearing this voice that says, Evie, come back. And she says, it took her a moment to realize that it was God, because in her words, the sheep don't forget the shepherd's voice. And when he said, Evie, come back again, she said, I can't, Lord. Look what I've done. Look what I've done to my body, to your creation. And he said, come back. And finally, Evie had given in to the Lord and said, oh, okay, I, I will leave it. I will leave this life, but you have to show me how because I don't know how. This is all I've known for so long. That was her identity. She became the son to the parents where they identified her as the son. She became the son-in-law to, others in the family, the brother, everybody that affirmed her in this. So it was very chaotic for her to all of a sudden want to change and navigate. But all she still says today is, for God, all the glory, I will do what he asks. And God was there with her, not just through the counseling and the care that she received from us, but from people that stood alongside of her. In churches, people say, I don't know the first thing what to do. How do I help somebody like that? Well, it might be just confessing before the Lord, I don't know what to do, but will you show me? It might be offering them out for a cup of tea or a coffee into a Bible study, disciple them so that they can know more about the heart of Jesus. Let Jesus do his work. We
Mm,
do our work by loving people and accepting them where they are and watching what the Lord does through the fruit of his word.
mhm,
And so
mhm,
Evie had a church that come alongside of her. She was moving and she said, Denise, do you know any churches? And luckily I had a colleague that I trusted. And he said, this is the perfect church for her. And it happened to be his location.
mhm,
And so he and his wife nurtured that relationship. And Evie got into a Bible study with men and women. She went to the pastor. Now, this is the unique thing. When she went to the pastor, she said she wanted to go into more of a study group. And he said, well, what study group do you want to go into? And she said, well, the men's. And the pastor said, how do you feel those men are going to feel when they find out you're really not one of them? And she said, wow, I hadn't even thought about that. Feeling
mm,
like she would be manipulating the men into believing that she was something other than who she was.
mm,
But it wasn't done in a criticism way. The spirit of it was love. It was, we want to come alongside and support you. We want to build you up as God sees you.
mm.
And that's what these folks did in so many different ways.
When you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, maybe in a sense she was thinking, well, gee, if I'm around men in this Bible study, I feel protected because then I don't have to worry about, you know, being judged or I'm coming, she maybe felt safe that way as she tried to do that in her relationship. I'm just I'm grabbing at things, but you don't know what's going on in
No,
their minds.
how would the women react to her when she looked like a man?
Yeah,
She would feel rejected where she's
right,
already felt rejected before. And
right.
so, attending a Bible study where there were men and women both was very foundational for her.
Yes.
Then, when she made the decision to have her birth name back, there was an elderly couple that was retired, and she asked them for support, and they drove her to the courthouse. This wasn't to like, you're going to do this, to bully her in some way. She's
Yeah.
asking for their support, and they're offering it. They went to the courthouse with her to give her that emotional support that she needed to walk in those doors. And then
Yeah.
they took her out for lunch, as we would do with any friend going through a difficult time. There was another friend from the church that took her clothes shopping. Now, some people think, well, she's becoming a woman, so she's going to put on something really feminine, flowery, lacy, whatever. That was never Evie's style. And this girl understood it. And after being able to talk with her about Evie's fears uh, in a phone conversation with her, we talked about her going into the women's department, which is still huge for Evie to do, but to take her where the polo shirts, where the t-shirts were, where the items that she would be more comfortable so that it wouldn't cause um, the anxiety to rise up in her. And so this young woman had done that, where a couple other women from the church understood Evie's fear of going into a women's restroom. But now she's starting to detransition. And with that, she starts to lose some of the effects of looking like a man. And so they went to a private location where they could, in a sense, practice with Evie going in and out so she would become comfortable into going into that women's restroom as she continued to detransition. What Evie would do before that is she just wouldn't go to the restrooms. She would hold it till she got home. And so all of this is just like a beautiful flower, right? Of how the church can come alongside of
Mm-hmm.
people. You don't have to have a PhD degree in transgenderism to come alongside and love somebody right where they're at
Yeah.
and to help disciple them.
I think too, as you're talking, all the things that she was so afraid of doing, it's almost like she was living in her own prison, right?
Yes,
And that's what happens to people when they don't, even if it has nothing to do with transgender or identity, it's just, people do not transform unless they come to Christ and they ask him to break free of the fears that they have had and the things that they were ashamed of once, and now he breaks that chain, and then they can be who God meant them to be. So
exactly.
I'm so grateful that you're here today, because if anybody has just joined us, we are talking with Denise Shick, and she has just spoken about her journey with her father and her family, and a little bit about some people that she's known from church, and that are going through the transgender and the gender identity crisis. So, Denise, let's shift a little bit, because I do want to talk a little bit about, how about the parents that are allowing the children now to become this transgender type personality or whatever, wherever they're going.
Yeah, I think, it is one of the gravest mistakes that our society is ever making. It is emotional and physical abuse on that child. First of all, we understand that our brains do not fully develop until they're anywhere from 23 to 25 years old, depending on the study that you look at. And so to approve and to take a child that just wakes up or feels uncomfortable in who they are, believing that this is the answer to transition, to take the pre-blocker hormones, to dress like, to be accepted like, is absolutely, to me, that is a sin.
Mm,
It is a grave, again, it is going against every grain of who that child is and could become. It is life taking instead of life giving.
mm,
So it is what we've seen in society. I never thought in my lifetime I would see what I have. The great concern is here we have this going on in society for what, like 10 years? And what I'd like to see is some studies done in another 20 years, 30 years. Where are they mentally and emotionally? Because so many people that identify as transgender are on anxiety medications. They're on antidepressants, including testosterone hormones, everything else that is, all that it does is it fills the pocket of the physicians, of the pharmaceutical companies, and then if they need mental and health care the rest of their lives, instead of a life of freedom where that God has for each of us, and knowing who we are as his children. I think it's important also to realize that I consider this the greatest spiritual battle in our time, because the enemy is after to destroy, destruct men and women, God's creation, knowing that he's really getting at God by using people,
mm,
using his very creation. And when he destroys our bodies, the consequences of that as well. In families, when this problem arises, the conflicts in a marriage, when you've got a dad that maybe is okay with what his son or daughter's doing and the mom isn't, the mental distress that is happening to everybody involved, the divorces that have occurred, the children that feel like they have been left out like a baggage of garbage because their dad or mom doesn't want them anymore. Their new life is now with a partner while they're transitioning, or they just leave to transition, leaving particularly the mother home to take care of the children.
Mm. Well, it makes me think about, I believe it's California where the kids are allowed to make that decision on their own without parental, consent. And so, you know, you see people, you know, maybe their hands are up. Well, what do you say to parents that are, oh, my kid is now wanting to transition? How do you counsel that?
Now, I think it's important for parents to look at what can you do, so to feel empowered. What can you do? You can spend time with your child, particularly, when we look at the younger children, to have that one-on-one time to be a part of, no matter what age the child is, show them what is God honoring as how we treat each other as husband and wife, as a gender, to respect women, that you don't abuse women, for women not to always put down dad because he did something wrong, so that the son doesn't think, I don't want to be like dad because I don't want a wife speaking about me like that. There's so many things that we can do as parents, have as healthy of a relationship as we can with that child, even if they are saying they want to transition. My words to you is get busy and get into your child's life as much as you can. Be a guiding tool for them, a relational tool for them. And if you've been really rough, judgmental towards that child, or hurtful in some way, maybe even the way that you've not always built them up, apologize for that. Just say, I'm really sorry. I'm really learning that I could have done better, and build from that foundation upward with the child. But the relationships are so important. Mom and dad still have a lot of influence. You
Mm.
also have the right to take a look at the social media, learn what your children like. Why do they like it? Bring conversations to the dinner table
Mm.
about these things.
Mhm.
Even the fact of asking your children, I realize these LGBT issues are a pretty big thing. How do you think the church could have handled it better? What would you like the church to know about what you and your peers are going through?
Mm.
Bring that child into a conversation so they feel a part of the solution, possibly, depending on what they have to answer, but they're feeling like you value their intake.
Mm. Hmm. It makes me think also about, churches like, no, these kids, what if they've been brought up in a church all their life, and then they go off to college, and then they start to identify with the LGBTQ community because they feel ousted maybe by other people and they can't make connections or friends, but then they come along and they're welcoming, and then that child, adult, young adult, now is starting to follow that. So,
Yeah.
what can a parent do?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that once our children go off to college, we realize they're at adult age. So one thing in particular to remember, because they're also trying to take care of themselves when their loved one comes out, and those emotional issues, as I had said about where I was in a place, or boundaries. Know where your boundaries are, first of all, but also let your child know that you don't know what the LGBT might be telling them, but that you love them, that you deeply love them, and that you will always be there, that you don't agree or believe that this is God's best for them, but you want them to know that you love them. And if they can be there, if I can be there as a parent to help you in some way that doesn't conflict with my beliefs as a Christian, then I want to be there for you.
Mm.
I hope you understand, these are just some of the things I hope you understand. That I'm a Christian. And when I say that, well, I don't agree, it doesn't mean I come against you. We have a different belief system
Mhm.
that we're operating from.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes. And, also I'm thinking about the ones that are sitting at, maybe, LGBTQ, or sitting in churches, and people are saying, well, why are they here? I mean, Why is the church allowing them here? How do you talk? How do you speak into that?
Yeah. So, and I can say that I can relate to that because there was a time where my dad came to church after I was saved, and I thought, what are you doing here? I don't want you here. So I get so many parts of where people are or where they have been in this. But by golly, if they are truly seeking God, then that is exactly where they need to be. And our job as the church is to come alongside of them, make them feel welcome, not rejected like the LGBT is going to tell them. They're not going to want you there. They hate you. You make them uncomfortable. Well, nothing like taking our uncomfortableness and showing them the love as Jesus would show them. Because that person that you are brushing off and thinking doesn't belong there could become a mighty man or woman of God that God ends up using to save countless others. You don't know, it could become a preacher. We don't know what service or how the Lord will use them. But that person, if the church doesn't reach down, what are they doing? They're basically sending them to the LGBT churches.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we
Exactly.
have to get our stuff together as a church and realize it's not about us. It's not about us feeling good
Hmm.
about ourselves or, oh, wasn't it a pretty service today? And everybody was so polite. Jesus went into the tough places where the sinners were, and he showed them love and truth. And
Hmm.
so I think it's so important to be a great example of Jesus Christ and
Hmm.
go where the Pharisees wouldn't go.
Hmm. Very good. Very good. Now, can you tell the audience what you are doing in your ministry? So, if anybody wanted to contact you or know a little bit more or ask you some questions, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. We basically we have been around for 23 years. And when I say be around, we've been around to support families in different ways. For instance, we have annual conferences. This coming up November, we will be in Clearwater, Florida. Family conferences to lift people up. We have support groups, Zoom support groups. Some are in-person support groups as well. Blogs. There are podcasts that they can go to on our website just to hear. Podcasts are basically to hear other people's stories and journeys and to encourage them through the Word of God that each guest leaves them with. We also offer biblical counseling and life coaching sessions. It's coming alongside of the family, seeing what the need is and how can we come alongside and support them and to build them up in a time where Satan is trying to isolate them and keep them in the closet. Because we as family members, we don't get any healing when we stay in the closet. We have to come out fighting. We have to come out and see this for what it is and fight for our loved ones, just as the college students you spoke of, where parents can feel so powerless. No, you feel powerful because you have the power to pray. And that is the mightiest thing that we can do for anybody that's caught up in this deception.
Well, you can find out more about Denise and other biblically based books that help families navigate through questions at helpforfamilies.com. And again, this is her book, Out of Darkness into the Light, Winning the Battle of Gender Identity. And Denise, what would you like to leave my audience with today?
I would love for them to consider the verse that the Lord had given me when I was 16 years old. Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord your God with all your heart. That means every ounce of your being, not just here, Lord, I'm going to trust you with this piece or maybe a little bit of that, but you are completely giving him your heart and you are trusting him with it 150%.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Denise Shick. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share. For more Christ centered conversations, visit thecallwithNancySabato.com. Until next time, all glory and honor to King Jesus.